the BRICS alliance is, of course, chaired by China, and China is using the BRICS alliance as a competitor against the US, because many countries who've seen regime change over the past decades now understand that they really need to team up with one another to make a huge, powerful coalition. Will the US stay as the leader of the world, or will China be the new leader?
This is Little by Little with Andy Schectman.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Little by Little. Today's guest is someone who's been sounding the alarm on the global monetary system long before it was fashionable. I've been following this gentleman for a very long time. Willem Middelkoop, the author and investor and founder of the the Commodity Discovery Fund, and he's been ahead of the curve on gold, BRICS, de-dollarization. I've been following him in that light for quite some time, and just learned he was also the founder of Amsterdam Gold, company that he sold in 2011. So on many levels, Willem, we are very much aligned, whether it be on BRICS, de-dollarization, precious metals. I'm thrilled to have you here, buddy. Thanks for coming in. How you doing?
Well, thanks for the invitation. We could be brothers from another mother. What would say, come on?
Well, if I believe my dad, I have brothers out there that I don't know, but I'm just teasing, Dad. But you never know. He was a child of the 60s and 70s. Crazy things happen. Willem, I'm thrilled that you're here, man, and thank you for coming. I know we've tried to do this before, but schedules got in the way, but here we are, and probably at a really interesting time to have you on here, at least geopolitically. I'll jump right in and start there. We're watching the slow burn of what could become a bigger regional war between Israel and Iran. And luckily, there have been no other Middle Eastern countries that have jumped in on behalf of Iran to make this a much bigger conflict, which could potentially drag the United States in, who is circling. The United States seems to be circling this whole thing. Is this just another proxy flare-up in your mind, or are we witnessing the open moves of something bigger, God forbid, World War III in the Middle East?
It's a very complicated story. And actually, this morning, at the start of this week, we had a meeting here in our office here near Amsterdam discussing this topic. I think you have two governments, both in Israel and Iran, who are actually fighting for their political survival. So they both need a war because the people rally behind the leader when there's an attack by a foreign country. So they both can use this very well. And I think both are also being restrained. Israel being restrained because the US doesn't want this to turn into an all-out war, which could lead even to World War III. And I think Iran is restrained as well, because Iran understands that as soon as they attack American interests, leading to a lot of body bags on the American side, the US needs to come in, like the US has done after Pearl Harbor at the start of the World War II, and then Iran might be in for a regime change, and that's the biggest risk. They don't want to take that risk. So you see the comments coming in from Russia, from the US in the last few days. Everybody's trying to cool things down. So if we're lucky, the world economy won't be affected. If we're lucky, the Strait of Hormuz, the oil tankers need to pass through, won't be blocked, but it's a very dangerous situation.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Scary. Hopefully, cooler heads prevail. Sticking in the Middle East, well, one of the things that I've talked about and you've talked about for quite some time is the geopolitical map shifting fast in especially the Middle East, with Saudi Arabia cozying up to China and kind of straddling the fence, if you will, between the United States and the interests of BRICS. Of course, we know they were invited into the BRICS fold, and it still really haven't made this delineation between which side they have decided to partner with. Iran and the UAE have joined the BRICS, as we know, and again, Turkey is clearly playing both sides and applying to the BRICS. Has the Middle East already flipped, and Washington just hasn't admitted it yet, or are we supposed to take what we see here with Saudi Arabia as an example at face value?
Yeah, also to come back to the real answer on your first question, whether this was a proxy war or there's more at stake. I think Saudi is playing both sides. We all know that the Saudis are good friends with Russia. You might remember the high five, which was during Trump's first term. There was the high five of MDS with Putin during a G20 or whatever meeting. The Saudis, I think, have been pressured by the US not to sign up as a BRICS member yet, but unofficially they are a member of the BRICS, and the BRICS alliance is of course chaired by China, and China is using the BRICS alliance as a competitor against the US, because many countries who've seen regime change over the past decades now understand that they really need to team up with one another to make a huge, powerful coalition. So the US can't play them one by one. And I think this is you asked whether the regional war now in the Middle East is a proxy. I think this is a proxy, like the Ukraine war is a proxy as well. It's a proxy of the larger fight on top of it, and that's the fight who will be the new hegemon. Will the US stay as the leader of the world, or will China be the new leader? And of course, that fight, you know about history, you know about the fourth turning, you know about these 80-year cycles. This is 81 years after Bretton Woods, and it's no surprise that we are reaching this. Well, as Neil Howe frames it, the winter phase. It's the phase of the conflict, and we also know if you get an end of an empire, that always goes with a lot of tension and conflict. So all these fights will wipe out more or less proxy fights of the larger fight, and we should hope and pray that the fight between the US and China won't become a kinetic one, where missiles start flowing in the South China Sea or wherever.
Yeah, God forbid. Absolutely. No, I agree with you. It's an interesting thing when you think of this attack or this conflict rather between Israel and Iran in the greater context of the BRICS and what it means, certainly with the energy situation and the integration into this new system, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There's a lot to think about, no question. We'll move on a little bit here, speaking about fragility of the global financial system, which you've long warned about. It's one of the things that I followed your work most closely related to. And at this point, with record deficits and ballooning debt and these rising geopolitical tensions, how close do you think we are to that full-blown monetary reset that everyone suspects is on its way?
Yeah, I was a bit early to this party. I started to buy physical silver in 2003. Needed to wire checks to North America to receive a 1,000 ounce silver bar by mail. The guy who was delivering it at our office, he was shocked because he couldn't carry the basket. It was too heavy for him. So that was almost 25 years ago. So I've been warning about a coming crisis in our monetary system almost ever since. I was a Dutch stock market commentator on Dutch TV between 2001 and 2008, and we always had these discussions in our team, in our editorial team, because these guys thought that I was nuts. Because Willem, why do you always cause problems? Because that's not a problem in the financial system. Well, then Lehman arrived. You might not be aware, but I published my first book only in Dutch in 2007, August 2007. That was the month the credit crisis started. And ever since, I've been worrying and I've been thinking about what would come next. And in that book in 2007, I wrote that I could envision that it might take another 15 years before this dollar-based system would reach really the end game. Well, I had 15 years, then you're 2022, 2023. And now we've reached the point that it's not the gold bugs warning that a monetary reset is next. If you look at YouTube, everybody's using the word reset now, and it's on main stage now. It's being discussed on main stage. I think that also explains why gold is exploding, because as you might know, institutional investors and sovereign investors only flee towards gold when there's the smell of war in the air, or there's a smell of monetary reset in the air. Well, we've got both now, so I'm not surprised that the gold price is being revalued by market forces. You could see a revaluation by central bankers initiative, but this is just a revaluation by market forces. I think the real reason is that the price discovery mechanism is moving from west to east. The Shanghai Gold Exchange is now powerful enough to compete with the COMEX. And I wrote a piece 6 months ago for OMVIF, which is a monetary think tank, London-based, that you could expect a short squeeze when the musical chairs, when the music stops. Everybody wants to sit on the last chair, and there's a run on physical. But it's my understanding, it's our understanding, we're just at the start of this whole process. It's not the end, it's just the start.
Yeah, it's interesting you speak of gold revaluation. It's the head of the Dutch National Bank that's been screaming the loudest about revaluing gold, your hometown. And it's interesting when you realize that gold is held on every central bank balance sheet in the West, including the Dutch, in what's called the gold revaluation account. It certainly lets one ponder, is this something that they have maybe on the horizon? You have members of the Bundesbank doing it. You have Senator Lummis here in Wyoming talking about it. And you've even heard people like Judy Shelton mention the possibility and potential of gold being revalued. And perhaps the market's doing it slowly right now, but maybe we get central banks who come in at some point as a way to combat this wave of coming down upon us.
Look what the Polish central bank is doing. Over 20% of their national reserve is gold now, and they started buying just a few years ago. We see many countries east of Germany very interested in adding to their gold reserve. So once a movement like this starts, once a trend like this starts, it's very hard to stop it.
Yeah, absolutely. The Polish National Bank is an interesting one. I think a very interesting one. And you mentioned that they're over 20%. Yeah, their goal was 20, and they've passed it now. They're like at 22%. They don't do these things by accident. But I wasn't going to ask you this, but since you mentioned it, I want to get your take on something that the head of the Polish National Bank said last year. Adam Głupinski is his name. And they asked him, why are you buying so much gold, Adam? And he says, why does the central bank own gold? Because gold will retain its value even when someone cuts off the power to the global financial system, destroying traditional assets based on electronic accounting records. Of course, we do not assume that this will happen, but as the saying goes, forewarned is forearmed, and the central bank is required to be prepared for even the most unfavorable conditions. This is why we see a special place for gold in our foreign exchange management process. After all, gold is free from credit risk. It cannot be devalued by any country's economic policy. Besides, it's extremely durable and virtually indestructible. I think it's interesting to hear a head of a central bank say those kinds of things. just like to get your 2-second opinion on that in regards to cryptocurrencies or whatnot.
Yeah. Well, this reminds me on a few notes which were published on the official website of the Dutch Central Bank, in which they stated that we still need gold because when there's a huge crisis within this financial system, you need the gold to bring trust back into the financial markets and into the system. So this has been acknowledged not only by the Polish but also by the Dutch. And after the US has weaponized the dollar, I think we're now in the phase that countries are starting to weaponize gold. I'm not pointing to Poland, but I'm pointing to Russia and China. They do understand he who has the gold makes the rules. And even Trump has posted that exact line on his social media. So and we come back to the point I made earlier. We're on main stage now. Everybody's talking gold. Everybody's reading about the history now and about the history of gold being the last man standing from a monetary point of view. There's not one currency that survived over 100 years and was unbacked. So all fiat currencies died. I made an appendix in the Big Reset. Actually, you can still download the book for free at our website. And in the back, you can find an appendix with all currencies which aren't around anymore and have been around for the last 250 years or have been in existence in the last 250 years. And there's not one which survived a longer period and back over 100 years. And I think the Dutch guilder had been around for 180 years, but most of the time it was gold-backed, of course.
Yeah, I think you and I studied at the same school of hard knocks. Dr. Franz Pick, one of the first books I ever read, all currencies are inherently meant to die. And that's to your point. Very interesting, the things that you say. I agree with all of it. And sticking with central banks and gold, they're quietly breaking records and have been for several years now, buying gold and repatriating it. That's a big one. Over 40 banks have brought their gold home from the Bank of England and the New York Fed. We're seeing massive deliveries here at home in the United States, which is something that we've never seen before, ever. In fact, since World War II, when all the gold came to the Bretton Woods Agreement, we saw the largest delivery in the history of the COMEX market in the May contract, over $8.5 billion. The March contract, over $4.5 billion. Who's taking possession of all this gold? So the question I have to you, it feels like gold is being re-monetized in stealth. What do the big money know that the average investor doesn't? Because at this level, whether it's central banks or $15+ billion standing for delivery here at COMEX in the last few months, what do they know that we don't?
Well, you have these levels of information. You know, some news is only shared among central bankers. I mentioned the OMVIV. I'm a member of the advisory council of the OMVIV, and the OMVIV is a very interesting place. It's a private think tank. It was started by David March, who was the editor for the Financial Times in Frankfurt. And after he retired, he built this monetary think tank. And it's the only place where the central bankers are meeting with the private sector. And of course, we all need to pay a fee to be part of that. And what I learned there, what I got confirmed there, that you have all these levels of information. So some information is only available among central bankers who have these monthly meetings in Basel. And then you have another level of information, and then let's say the Goldman Sachs of this world. They hear from their friends and their contacts in the world of central banks, and sometimes stories are also shared with them because central banks need some help. So you have let's say the very smart money, they have a better understanding of what's happening, and then it trickles down. But once it reaches the retail audience, or once it reaches the mainstream media, you know, it's more propaganda or more spin than news. So I for myself always try to get as close to the source, as close to the higher levels as possible. And I see myself within mBridge as almost a fly on the wall. So be able to listen in what's being discussed and what's the mood of the industry. And I'm a bit shocked and surprised to learn that in central bankers circles, they can only think about the status quo. Actually, they don't they don't dare to openly discuss that we might lose the control over the financial system. Or but I always say, watch what they do, not what they say. And if you see them buying gold in all these large amounts, you know they're pretty scared or pretty nervous about where things could lead to. And the latest discussions I witnessed within these groups, they're taking these stable coins very, very serious. They understand they can't stop it. They know it's private money, but you're a student of monetary history. Private money has been very successful in the past. It all started with private money. And now you have this fight between private money, the Bitcoin and other digital forms of money, and you have the official money. But the central bankers understand that they need to step in now and try to control the world of stablecoins. Otherwise, they will lose that part of the business and the industry. And that's why Cantor Fitzgerald is teaming up with Tether now. And of course, Tether has always been a sketchy company. They never had a full audit. It's just like Fort Knox. But this is very interesting, and now we reach the point that the financial system needs the tokenization. If you read what the CEO of Larry Fink of BlackRock is telling his audience, his professional audience, that everything will be tokenized, because we are a trader. We have two traders. I run an equity fund, and if you buy shares, it takes T+2 to settle these shares. If you have tokenization, it will be settled immediately. So I think the US will try to start using this tokenization to reform the financial system. But what I learned from these central bankers discussions, they don't know how to. They don't have a master plan. First, they thought CBDC would be the way to go and to control it all. Well, Trump now said we don't want CBDCs. I think the ECB will start with their CBDC later this year. Of course, China is quite successful. So, and that's also what I wrote in the Big Reset in the afterword. You always hope that the great powers worldwide will find a common ground to bring this monetary system to the next level without any crisis, without any real disturbances, without any collapse. But the more I study the financial system and the more I know about the financial system, the more worried I get in a way, because we have this Western bloc now, which is the US and France, let's say the allies from the Second World War. And you could add to Japan and South Korea, and then you have the rest of the world. So it's not West against East; it's the Western allies against the rest of the world now, and that's why China is so powerful, because they can add all these countries from the rest of the world to their bloc. And China, never forget, China is using their currency now to do trade with all these countries. So they already won the game, you could say, because the US is losing after the Second World War. The US was very successful in making all these countries trade in US dollars, but now there's so many countries in the East who don't use the dollar that much anymore, and already China is doing most of its bilateral trade in other currencies than the dollar, and preferably in their own currency, because they can print it. And so China understands that if you can print your own currency and other countries take it as payment for bilateral trade, you're in a very, very powerful position.
Yeah, you touched on something that is very important to me, and that is the topic of de-dollarization, the BRICS. China just came out a couple weeks ago with their cross-border renminbi payment system, which is mBridge. They have connected parts of the Asiatic nations, I think 11 of them. Those are the countries in Southeast Asia, and 5 of the Middle Eastern countries. But to your point about settling immediately, the SWIFT system takes 3 to 5 days going through intermediary banks. This new bridge technology settles in 7 seconds with a 98% reduction in fees using their local currencies and then settling imbalances in gold. This is a trend that definitely we see happening. And then I want to focus on the gold part for a moment, in that part of this piece to this puzzle is that the Shanghai Exchange, you had mentioned earlier, which is now challenging COMEX, is opening up, trying to globalize their footprint, and they're opening up exchanges starting in Hong Kong and Saudi Arabia, and ultimately through South America, Asia, and Africa, the Belt Road, if you will, where all of these countries, which represent the majority of human population, the Belt Road alone is 70%, and you add in the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the BRICS with the Belt Road, you're 90% of population that will have human population. That is, that will have the ability to trade over this new bridge technology using their own currencies and settling in gold. Well, the gold part is the important part, and they've talked about opening these extensions of the Shanghai Exchange in these countries so that the balances can be settled in gold without it being held in one jurisdiction. So with all of that in mind, do you see gold, its run, as a slow managed repricing by the powers that be? Or do you think this, when the realization of what's coming, the infrastructure that's being set up, will it be a full-blown panic bid that shocks the world?
Well, when it's true, what you just described, and I think it's true, you already described the build of a new monetary or trade system. And so this is not a situation like Bretton Woods, where you had this one big conference and the US put its dollar plan on the table and we could, vote if we would accept it, yes or no. I think the Chinese are playing it very smart. I studied China quite a bit. 2 of my books have been translated into Mandarin, and I traveled quite a bit there. So I think it's a fascinating country with a fascinating history. The system has been more or less the same for over 5,000 years. Gold has been real money for over 5,000 years, so they do understand gold. They had hyperinflation in the late 1940s, as you might remember. Actually, the Communist Party was able to, have a successful revolution because of the hyperinflation of the 1940s. So they understand this very well, and they're building this new trading system, and they know they need gold, maybe to settle bilateral trade, maybe to start a full-backed currency one day. I don't think that's their main goal, but they know they can do that when needed. And I'm a bit afraid that the West will keep sticking to its dollar, system, while being in decline and having more and more debts and getting more and more stable, while the East is building their own, trading system, getting more powerful by the day and by the year, and starting to really compete with the Western dollar system. So you have a bifurcation of the international monetary system, the Western system, as we all know it, and then the new BRICS system, which is laughed at by the mainstream media in the West, and we then don't take it serious until the day we need to take it serious, because they will say, you have to pay, you can buy our commodities, but you have to pay with gold, Bitcoin, or whatever. And actually, Putin said that after the start of the Ukraine war. Most people forgot it, but we here in Europe were relying on Russian gas, and we don't have Russian gas anymore. That's why we pay triple the price for energy than you guys in the US. But why don't we have a Russian cheap energy anymore? Because we refuse to accept Putin's offer to pay with gold or Bitcoin, but he would accept euros or dollars. So in a way, this divide is already there, but most people don't see it, and the Western mainstream media is so arrogant, and they just laugh about it. But I think soon we might start crying. Remember Trump once telling the Germans that they could lose the Russian cheap energy and they would be, their economy would be really harmed because of the high energy pricing. And that was the German delegation at the United Nations. They were laughing when Trump was saying that in their face. And now Germany is having some real serious problems here in Europe.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned there that I think most of the Western media has ignored and has missed completely and totally, they laugh at the BRICS. It's not big enough. It's not a big enough system. The bridge technology they came out and said is not compatible with euros, pounds, and dollars. So you can see who they're signaling out: euros, pounds, and dollars. But this is the part that the Western media has missed, and that is that the Russian Minister of Finance, Sergei Lavrov, came out about a month ago, and this is what I think is the biggest piece that is not being discussed, is that he said the bridge technology, which is not compatible with dollars, pounds, and euros, will be open to non-BRICS members. And that should be screamed at, because now you bring in the SCO, the Eurasian Economic Union, and the Belt Road Initiative, and now you have 90% of human population, 3 of the 4 largest nuclear arsenals on the planet, the majority of commodity production, commodity refining, manufacturing, including Vietnam, who was just formally admitted into the BRICS along with Indonesia. So you have all of these things that are happening that the Western media, to your point, is ignoring. It should be very, very interesting to see.
Don't forget mBridge, the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, were partnering in the mBridge project, and actually they got out of the project because they understood this is being weaponized by the BRICS alliance now against the West. So they said, well, we can't continue. And after the weaponization of the dollar by the US, I think we have the weaponization of gold and commodities now by the BRICS alliance, and they will play smart. These are smart guys. One example, you might be aware of GATA.
We all owe Bill and Chris a debt of, all of us owe Bill and Chris a debt of gratitude. Absolutely.
I was a student and an avid reader of their work in the late 1990s. And you might remember there was this GATA Gold Conference in Dawson in the Yukon. And I still feel ashamed that I didn't go there because I knew it was coming. And the Russians, they sent one of their diplomats. And he was aware of the cheating and manipulation of gold prices in the West. They know gold was held down. They used it. They built a huge gold reserve. China understands this. So I always, after all the research I've done, all the traveling, I learned that the East understands this much better than most of the people in the West.
Yeah, you mentioned, it's interesting that you mentioned gold weaponization. I've talked a lot about the dollar and the treasury weaponization, but I haven't thought about that. And it does make sense. It makes a lot of sense that gold is being weaponized. But I would argue also, to your point, perhaps what happened by the BIS, their innovation hub, pulling out at the 12th hour, citing, they say Augustus Carstens, this goofball, says at the 12th hour, the head of the BIS at the time, I think his tenure is just ending right now, but he says, the BIS can't be partner to any technology that will allow sidestepping of Western sanctions. It's as if he just realized after 4 years of their innovation hub working with China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and UAE, that Russia was the R in BRICS. It almost seems like espionage to me, that it was done intentionally. And there's a lot of things under the surface, perhaps, that we aren't privy to, but I found it to be very, very dirty, I guess we shall say, the way that they pulled out. And this technology this bridge technology that I speak of, the renminbi cross-border. That is mBridge, just branded under a different name. So last question on gold, and then one more question, and I'll let you go. With all of what we've talked about with the bridge technology, with the countries settling imbalances in gold, with the central banks buying gold and repatriating, do you believe it will regain an official role in a future monetary system, or will it continue to operate the way it is now as a shadow reserve behind the scenes?
When people ask me if gold will come back into the monetary system, I would say it doesn't need to come back. It's already there. Look what all central banks have in their vaults. They don't have oil there or Bitcoin, or they have lots of gold. And almost all countries have lots of gold. And some only a few percent, some over 20%. The US has over 70 or 80% of financial reserves in gold. So gold has always been part of the current financial system, but it was ignored. And the US tried to use its Western friends to make them sell part of their gold holdings, telling them gold was no longer an essential part for the financial system. But what did the US do? They didn't sell any ounce themselves. Well, they don't have much to sell, because if you study the documents which point at the end and the collapse of the London gold pool in March 1968, we learned, and that these documents are known and published from inside, that Fort Knox was being emptied. There weren't enough good delivery bars available in Fort Knox in March 68. I think that's also the reason why Trump and Elon Musk are very silent now about a audit of Fort Knox, because if you would go there, you would find probably you would get a negative surprise. And I think Scott Bessent understands this very well, and he's toned them down because this is just too important. And actually, I'm working on a presentation to show our audience in here, especially in the Netherlands, and our clients, what's really going on with Fort Knox and the New York Fed. Because if you study the pictures, I studied all pictures being published from Fort Knox and the New York Fed. It shows a gold facade, and I think I can prove it. And it, together with these historical documents, I would like to use that, and also for an official reason, because we have the Dutch accounting office, which needs to check to check the bills and the statements from the Dutch government, and our accounting office came out with news last week that they are doing a study on Dutch gold reserves, past and present. And actually, they asked the public to help them and come with input. So I'm preparing some input to help their research. So gold, to come back to a question, gold has been always part of this system. It's still part of the system, but it's getting more and more recognized that it's part of the system. And it will become a more central part of the system. And as you pointed out before, the banks need a revaluation of gold to help with their balance sheets. And of course, the US is the only one which is still using mark-to-market. So the US will likely, US is the only one not using mark-to-market, but the historical cost price. So the US might go mark-to-market. So that will help the Trump administration to use the profits by this revaluation to become more active in Bitcoin, because I'm quite convinced that the Trump administration will use crypto as well. But gold will become will stay and become a very important part of the international financial system in years to come.
Yeah, a lot of people, to your point earlier, are talking about these types of assets being used with stable coins issued off of them to help support the treasury market, to fill the void that is being emptied, or to fill the void that has come as a result of central banks no longer buying the number of treasuries that they once did. Interesting thoughts for sure. last question, and I'll let you run, Willem, and I appreciate your time today. It's been a fascinating discussion. If you had to dump one right now, at least in terms of the American investor, what would it be? Bonds, stocks, or the dollar? Which would be the first to go?
Well, people who follow me, who have been following me for the last 15 years in all my writings, I never advise to buy bonds because that was like a toxic asset for me. And of course, I'm always a little early to the party. Of course, bonds were doing that thing up until 2019, 2020. But then when interest rates broke out of this declining trend, which had been ongoing for 40 years, then we had the real carnage on the bond market. I always warned for which would happen. They lost 50% of the value in 1 year. And now rates are coming down again. Switzerland has negative rates again. And people think we might be in another deflationary period. China is reporting deflation. I think this is just the eye of the storm. And we'll see a huge pickup of inflation in a not too distant future. Watch what Trump will do to get the midterm elections. He will need to stimulate the economy. He will need to print. I think QE has already started, but we don't call it QE. So there's, I think bonds are quite toxic in our book. And what we do as the investors, I was a billion dealer myself. I was selling gold and silver. But what I never liked about that business, that the margins are quite small. You just make money by storing it for people. But in our current business, we buy stakes in companies, we buy equities who have all these ounces in the ground, and we don't buy stakes in producers because producers end up with less reserves at the end of the year than the start of the year. So we want to have, we want to be fully positioned in all these smaller companies who have these assets in the ground, and the assets in the ground are, you can still buy them pennies to the dollar. The valuation is still so low. We buy ounces in the ground through listed companies for $20, $30, $40 per ounce. And I think that's where the real revaluation will come in the years ahead. And that's why we build a fund. We have over 160 million assets under management now. And it's all invested in assets which are still in the ground. Gold ounces, silver ounces, uranium, you name it.
Wonderful. And for people to find out more about what you're doing in this respect, or to follow your fantastic information, Willem, what's the best way for people to do that?
I'm very active on Twitter. You'll just search for my name. That's all free. A lot of information can be found at the Commodity Discovery Fund website, cdfund.com. That's where you can find a free download of the Big Reset. And I have my own Patreon account where I charge a little bit of money, not because I need the money, but I think some information is valuable, and I don't want to give away everything for free. I stopped doing that.
I understand. It's valuable information, and I think in some respects, you get what you pay for. So, and anyways, Willem, I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope our paths cross in person one of these days. If you're ever this way, if you're ever in Florida, let me know. But you are someone who I think everyone needs to pay attention to, and I hope this interview underscores that. So again, thank you. We'll have you back. I look forward to picking up where we left off, and all the best to you, sir.
Thank you.
Little by Little with Andy Schectman.